I'll just do a little intro. We just wait for, you can see in the attendees, we have a couple of people coming in. People get an automatic. Dobry večer всім, good evening. Welcome for, I think, the 7th or 8th of our Expert Insights. Це вже 7 чи 8 вебінар Expert Insightів. Ми нині вечір маємо цікаву тему і хочемо подякувати Канадській Українській фундації за те, що вони підтримують нашу програму. If you haven't seen all of our previous programs, they're on our website, ucc.ca, and I'll just briefly show the website page. On our website are all the previous recordings of previous webinars available for your review. This is the last one that's listed for this 2023 year, but we may have one more. We might be able to sneak one more in this year, and then we will have a full program in the 2024 year as well to be launched in a couple of weeks. So stay tuned, and we'll keep you posted on what's next. So tonight, I'm very pleased to invite our friend Jeffrey Horncastle. I'm going to let him introduce himself and tell us about where he works. And якщо ви маєте питання, if you have questions, we ask you to use the Q&A button, so кнопка Q&A at the bottom of your screen. Пан Дмитро буде слідкувати. Дмитро will take a look at the questions that are posed. You can write a question at any time. We'll be reviewing it. And at the end of the presentation by Jeffrey, we'll have time to review the questions. Again, we can't answer specific questions about cases, but we can answer general questions and give you information on where to find more resources. So without further ado, Jeffrey.
Igor, 1 second. Can you explain how interpretation works?
Yes. Oh, yeah, sorry. So if you are listening and to me speaking in English, you can switch to Ivana, who is on our screen speaking in Ukrainian. Ви можете перейти на українську мову. Пані Івана є наш перекладач. At the bottom of your screen, вниз вашого екрану є кнопка Interpretation. Ви можете назначити English або Ukrainian. Ukrainian ви будете чути Івана голос, English ви будете чути Jeffrey голос прямо. Дякую, Дмитре, за цю пригадку. So, Jeffrey, I think we're going to get started. I'm going to switch into Ukrainian to help to listen and to help Ivana with the translation, so you can share your screen anytime.
Okay, so good evening, everyone. Like Igor mentioned, my name is Jeff Horncastle. I am the Acting Client and Communications Outreach Officer at the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre. So tonight, I'll be presenting about the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre, basically what we've seen over the last year or two, and how to protect yourself. I will show you, I'll tell you what mass marketing fraud is, what tools the fraudsters are using, the top solicitation methods, which means are they phoning people the most, or are they using social media? We'll go through top payment methods, top reported frauds, the impact that fraud has, and most importantly, how to report fraud. Okay, so what is the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre? The Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre is a joint forces operation led by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, RCMP, in partnership with the Ontario Provincial Police and Competition Bureau of Canada. Day-to-day operations are led by the RCMP. The Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre is located in North Bay, Ontario. Now, what does the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre do? Basically, we are Canada's central repository for data, intelligence, and resource material as it relates to fraud, The Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre commits to providing timely, accurate, and useful information to assist citizens, businesses, law enforcement, and governments in Canada and around the world. So our main goals are to really get prevention messaging out there, educate Canadians, disruption of criminal activities, dissemination of intelligence, and support to law enforcement, not only in Canada, but internationally. Now, going through our different units, the unit that I primarily work in is the fraud prevention and intake unit. Now, what we do is we accept reports by telephone, mail, fax, and we also accept reports from local police around the country. It features an inbound call center, an online fraud reporting system, which is on our website, and I'll go through that a little bit later. Call center operators are fraud specialists who validate online reports, answer inbound fraud attempts, and victim calls. They basically record the information and provide education, support, and appropriate referrals if required. Reports are referred to two other units, which we'll see in a couple of minutes, when they meet specific conditions. So if they're a senior victim, they might need follow-up from our senior support unit. If it's a large dollar loss, it'll be referred to the proper agency or police of jurisdiction, or whatever the case may be. Now, referrals really depend on what we're seeing. Moving on to, still within the fraud prevention and intake unit, like I mentioned, we focus a lot on fraud prevention and awareness. So really one of the primary goals of my position is to do presentations like we're doing tonight, get the word out, our messaging out through the media, on our website, on social media, whatever way we think is the most effective. Now, there are many campaigns throughout the year that we participate in, including Cyber Security Awareness Month. November was Financial Literacy Month, and March, which we co-chair with the Competition Bureau of Canada, is Fraud Prevention Month. So that's a month where we really push a lot of our messaging and try to engage as many people as we can. Yeah, in a nutshell, that's what we do for fraud prevention and awareness. Okay, now moving on to the second unit at the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre is our senior support unit. So like I mentioned, we refer files that fit a certain criteria. So of course, if a victim is a senior person, we have a senior support unit that we refer the file to. And what they do is they're strictly volunteers, they're senior employees. They come in and they place calls, follow-up calls to senior victims, offer support to them, offer more steps to take, and resources, right? And the idea behind this is because a lot of our volunteers have been victim in the past, so they can really relate to personal experiences and be on the same level as their co-senior victims. On top of this, we have a group of senior volunteers that go across the country and offer presentations like the one that I'm doing tonight. So this is something that's very unique to the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre, and we cherish very much. And the work they do is so valuable. And lastly, the operational support unit. So the operational support unit is a recognized intelligence unit made up of analysts and intel researchers and profilers. They work closely with law enforcement agencies, regulatory bodies in Canada, and the US private corporations, financial institutions, and internet service providers to detect and deter fraud and criminal operations within Canada and internationally. The operational and support unit educates law enforcement and our private sector partners. They provide statistics and investigative packages. And there's an international outreach program that they participate in. They also work as liaisons with our private sector partners to disrupt tools of the fraudsters, which are primarily contact telephone numbers, email addresses, websites, as well as payment methods. Now, I touched on disruption a little bit. This slide shows us a little bit of the work the operational and support unit did in 2022. We assisted in disrupting 2,195 phone numbers, 15,514 email addresses, 3,415 merchant accounts. So this is for, fraudulent merchandise where they were, either counterfeit merchandise or just a direct fraudulent website or merchant. The CFC helped disrupt those accounts, and 6,594 fraudulent bank accounts. So these are all accounts that were linked to fraudulent activity. Now we're kind of getting into the main purpose of our presentation tonight. These are numbers, but the numbers are very concerning, right? So we're seeing in 2019 roughly 150 million reported to the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre in overall losses. We could see that over a period of 4 years that number skyrocketed to 531 million in 2022. So it really puts emphasis on the need for these types of presentations, and to get the messaging out there so Canadians are aware on of what's common, what's out there, and what do I do to protect myself from being one of those numbers, right? Although it's more than being one of those numbers, but in other words, we want to equip everyone with the tools necessary to protect themselves from being a victim. Now, top solicitation methods, which means what methods are fraudsters using to communicate their initial communication with victims. So we're seeing that, we hear all this talk about cyber fraud. Yes, it is growing. It is a growing trend. But as we're seeing on this slide, the telephone is still the primary method of solicitation that fraudsters are using based on number of reports. Although, if we take into account the cyber portion, which is email, internet, and internet social network, which is roughly 42%, it is a growing number, but all this to say is that fraudsters are still using the telephone quite frequently, and using different methods, which we'll get into after, to trick Canadians into sending money or sharing personal information, putting them at risk for identity theft or identity fraud. Now, although the pandemic is behind us, since the beginning, we've noticed that generally Canadians have changed the way that they've done things. Not everyone, but in a general manner, more people are spending more time shopping online. More people are communicating online more frequently. People are doing online banking that may not have been doing online banking before the pandemic came. All this to say is that naturally, the more time that people are spending online, then the more they're at risk and more vulnerable to falling to a scam. So we're still seeing the impact from the pandemic from a fraud perspective. Now moving on to a little bit more statistics. What we're seeing here are the top 10 frauds based by number of reports. So at the top of the list, we see that identity fraud, 19,560 reports, followed by phishing, which was our top mass marketing fraud based on number of reports, with over 10,000 reports, followed by extortion, personal information, and service, which make up the top 5. Now, if we look at the top frauds based by dollar loss, the list is a little bit different than it was based on number of reports. We're looking at investment scams with 308.6 million lost in 2022, which is by far the highest reported fraud based on dollar loss to the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre. And we'll get into this a little bit more after as well. Romance scams have always been at the top of the list. Spear phishing, I'll explain a little bit what spear phishing is as well, and followed by service and extortion, which are all in the top 5 based on dollar loss. Now, if we think of all the stats that I just shared, specifically the 531 million lost to mass marketing fraud in 2022, into perspective, where we actually estimate that only 5 to 10% of victims report to the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre. In reality, the loss for Canadians is into the billions of dollars. For various reasons, like the victims don't report. They may feel ashamed and embarrassed, and they don't want to discuss what happened to them. They might think that there's no point in reporting if there's no guarantee that they're going to get their money back. Or in some cases, Canadians don't know where to report. They may not know how to report to the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre. So even more important to try to get this messaging out and try to get as many Canadians to report as possible, because the more information that we have, the more we can share with Canadians to protect themselves, and the more information we have to share with international law enforcement agencies. Okay, so now we'll dive into the different types of scams that we're seeing at the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre. So I put a little bit of emphasis on investment scams, which are defined as any false, deceptive, misleading, or fraudulent investment opportunity, often offering higher than normal or true monetary returns. Victims often lose most or all of their money. Now, we estimate that over 50% of the dollar loss was due to crypto investment scams. Now, what fraudsters are doing is they're reaching out to victims through compromised social media accounts. So they might claim, you might think you're communicating with a friend or a family member, and then they start offering the victim, this opportunity to make all kinds of money in this crypto investment, and they're convinced to invest into a fraudulent platform that way. These platforms, these websites are very well done. Another way that they're getting to victims is they're using search engine optimization, which in simple terms, if you go to Google and you type in crypto investment, there's a good chance that the first 5 to 10 results that come up are going to be fraudulent websites. So something to be aware of that, it's another method that fraudsters are using. No matter what, search engine optimization is common in so many different types of scams. Just being aware that it's out there can save you from being a victim. Always keep in mind that when you send cryptocurrency, there's a good chance that you won't get it back because it's nearly impossible to trace for law enforcement. If you're thinking about investing, whether it's into cryptocurrency or whatever the case may be, do your research. You can do that by verifying if they're registered with your provincial securities commission. You can ask them for resources. Verify the URL, the physical address of the company, the phone number. Keep in mind that these fraudulent companies can sometimes copy the real names, the names of real companies. So what you want to do is always take the time to really invest, no pun intended, but invest the time into really looking into what you're thinking about doing. And of course, if the offer seems too good to be true, it probably is. Okay, so romance scams. Romance criminals or romance fraudsters use every type of dating or social networking site available to contact their victims. Their accounts are created using photos, in a lot of cases stolen from legitimate people. Their background stories often copy the victims, and they often claim that they're in the military, work overseas, or are successful business people. They quickly profess their love to gain the victim's trust, affection, and money. This type of fraud relies very heavily on the victim's emotions. A little bit different than other types of frauds because in a lot of cases, these fraudsters will wait, a month or two before asking the victim for money. And the reason they do that is because they want to make sure that they have a connection with the victim. And that's when they unfortunately know that they can attack the victim and potentially steal a lot of money from them. So what you want to do to protect yourself is, you see a profile that's too good to be true, you get a friend request from somebody you don't know. First rule of thumb is, if you don't know the person, then don't accept a friend request, because if you do, you're putting yourself at risk. If you're on a dating site, important to know, if there's the profile picture that looks too perfect, they might be using a picture of a celebrity from a different country, or somebody you're not familiar with. You can do a reverse image search through Google. Has a feature to do that. What that does is that it'll show you every name associated to that's been used associated to the picture that the person is using. Usually a very good indication that the person could be a fraudster. And most importantly, there's nothing wrong with trying to communicate with people online or on dating sites, social media. But always remember to not send money to somebody you don't know or that you've never met, no matter what story they're giving you. These fraudsters really play with emotions, so don't let it get to that point. So extortion, what is extortion? Well, extortion happens when someone unlawfully obtains money, property, or services from a person, entity, or institution through coercion, or in other words, by threatening them. So if you don't send money, you're going to be arrested. If you don't send money, then this is going to happen. That's what extortion is. So unfortunately, we get a lot of reports of sextortion, where victims are asked to share nude photos or do something inappropriate in front of the camera, and the suspect claims to have recorded the victim, and if they don't send the money that they're requesting, that the suspects will say they'll share the recording with everybody on their contact list, their family members, or all over YouTube, right? So something to be aware of. The social insurance number scam. Now, this is a scam that has been around in Canada for for I'd say a good at least 7 years. Now it's a phone call claiming to be from the government. They can claim to be Canada Revenue Agency, Service Canada, the Canada Border Services Agency. Basically, they'll tell you in a recorded message that your social insurance number is at risk. It's been flagged for fraudulent activity, and that if you don't cooperate with their investigation, you can be arrested. So the way this typically goes is that they want to try to convince the victim that they're doing an investigation, and the victim has to prove that the money that they have is clean money. So they ask the victim to deposit the money in a Bitcoin ATM or to send a payment by gift cards. All this to say is that if you ever get a phone call from a government agency and they're threatening you in any kind of way, it's a scam. Now, if you're not sure, you're getting a phone call and a government agency is asking you for personal information and you're not too sure, it's always safer to let them know you're going to call them back. You have to confirm who you're speaking with, because remember that these criminals can make any phone number show up on your call display. The only way to confirm who you're speaking with at 100% is to make the outgoing phone call. So you end the phone call and you look up the official phone number for Service Canada or the Canada Revenue Agency or your financial institution or whoever they claim to be, and make the outgoing call and confirm the phone call that way. It's the best way to protect yourself from being a victim. Now, moving on to service scams. Service scams have actually gone up substantially in the last year or two. Now, one of the variation is the tech support scam, where they might claim to be Microsoft or Apple, and if there's a virus on your computer, fraudsters typically call victims directly, or you might get a pop-up on your computer which completely freezes your computer, and it basically says that you have to call a phone number, to resolve the issue. So just know that if this ever happens, computer companies will never call you directly. They'll never ask for remote access to your computer. And if you just, remember never to give anybody remote access to your computer. If you're having issues with your device or your computer, always bring that device into a local technician, and that way you'll be sure that you're dealing with somebody that you can trust. Of course, home repairs and products. Now we commonly see fraudsters claiming to be offered duct cleaning services. Again, you want to do your research, right? You want to go with a local company. Do your research online. Go with a company that has a physical address in your area. Verify phone numbers. Like I said, physical addresses, there are map tools available online that you can use. Always take the extra steps to protect yourself. It's so important. And lastly on the list is cell phone plans. So this is a scam where fraudsters will claim to be your cell phone service provider, and they'll claim to offer you a deal on a cell phone, $40 a month, brand new iPhone 15. But you have to agree to it right away. And they move on to saying that, okay, now they have to do a credit check and you have to share some personal information. So they move on to asking the victim for their social insurance number, driver's license number. And the purpose of doing this is to steal your identity and to use that information for identity fraud. Again, best way to deal with this is make the outgoing call. So if your provider is TELUS, Bell, Rogers, look up the official phone number for them and make the outgoing call. And that way there you'll be sure you're speaking with the real company. Okay, so now identity theft and identity fraud. I've touched on this a couple of times. Now the difference between the two, identity theft, is basically there are so many different ways you can be a victim of identity theft, whether it's through a breach with a financial institution or an employer, where your social insurance number may have been compromised. Maybe you clicked on a phishing email and provided some personal information. You may have lost an important document from the Canada Revenue Agency that included your social insurance number. The minute another person takes that information, that is identity theft. Now, if that information is taken and used to open credit card accounts, cell phone accounts, or whatever they can, essentially, that's when it becomes identity fraud. Now, it's important that once you're aware that you're a victim of identity theft, you should be taking the steps to protect yourself from being a victim of identity fraud. The steps are all listed on our website at antifraudcenter.ca. Now, there are many steps that you should be taking, which include contacting Equifax and TransUnion, which are the two credit reporting agencies in Canada. Contacting government agencies to protect your identity, so fraudsters are not applying for benefits with your identity. And like I mentioned, these steps are all outlined on our website at antifraudcenter.ca. Now, phishing and smishing. What is phishing? Phishing are basically messages that include techniques designed to trick the victim into thinking they're dealing with a reputable company or a government agency. So you might get a message claiming to be one of your service providers, saying you have to update information, or they might claim to be the Canada Revenue Agency or Service Canada offering you a payment. So important to know that the government will never send you any kind of payment by email or text message. Never click on a link, avoid clicking on links. And it goes back to the messaging that I said previously. If you're not sure, if the message claims to be the Canada Revenue Agency, for example, go look up the official phone number for them, make the outgoing call, and confirm if that message is actually coming from them or not. Because sometimes by simply clicking on a link or downloading an attachment, you could be infecting your device, or you could be exposing some of your personal information. So it's just so important to avoid clicking on links or downloading attachments before verifying who it's coming from, because victimization can happen very quickly. So on the next page here, we're seeing an example of a phishing text message that claims to be from the Canada Revenue Agency, or the CRA. So it says, "We determined your annual entitlement based on the tax form submitted. Please visit below." Now we took the link out, but typically there would be a link after C for you to click on to accept that payment. But like I mentioned, the Canada Revenue Agency will never send you a payment by text message, by email. Payments will always be by direct deposit or by checks. Now, some of the stuff to watch out for with phishing, a lot of times there'll be spelling mistakes. Not so much the case, still happens, but with artificial intelligence, very possible that we don't see as many spelling mistakes, but they're still out there. Another red flag is that if you get an email and it says attention, for example, my name is Jeff Horncastle. My email address is jeff.horncastle at whatever. It would say attention jeff.horncastle. So for me, that would be a red flag that it's probably a phishing email because it did not address me properly. And of course, a link that goes to an external site. So if it claims to be your financial institution and you hover your mouse over the hyperlink, you might see some kind of weird link that has nothing to do with who they claim to be. So those are ways to protect yourself. But like I mentioned, the best method is to confirm with the company or organization directly by telephone if the message is actually coming from them or not. So spear phishing, what is spear phishing? It's actually one of the most common and dangerous attack methods currently used to conduct fraud, most commonly on businesses and organizations. What fraudsters do is they really compile all the information that they can on the business or the organization. They go on the website, they get email addresses, phone numbers. They'll go to LinkedIn profiles, gather information, or in some cases, they'll infiltrate the systems simply from the victim clicking on a phishing link. Previously, it gives them access to all the victim's networks, right? Now there are different variations of spear phishing. The biggest one that puts businesses at risk is when they intercept an invoice that has to be paid. And this is when they infiltrate the system. They'll claim that they changed their wire transfer information, and they'll ask the victim company to send the funds that they owe the supplier to an alternate account. Now the victim, not knowing that their systems are infiltrated, send the money to an alternate bank account, and in reality, it's the fraudster's bank account. So that's one variation. Another variation of spear phishing is if you work in payroll and you get an email from someone claiming to be an employee saying, hey, I changed my direct deposit information to this bank account, just know that it could be a scam. Always important to have systems in place or do the verification with that employee directly to see if they actually have changed their bank account information, because email addresses are out there in a lot of cases for a lot of companies. Very easy to spoof an email address. So that's one of the most common variations we're seeing again. And of course, if you're a junior employee with a company, if you get a text message or an email claiming to be from your boss, asking you for a favor, know that it might be a scam, especially if they're asking you to purchase gift cards. So those are the three main type of spear phishing variations that we're seeing at the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre. So like I mentioned, this is actually an example of what I mentioned here. So this text says, are you available at the moment to run a quick errand? So that first message is claiming to be the president or CEO of a company, targeting a junior employee. So fraudsters know the junior employees typically, they're going to do what their boss tells them to do, right? So this is where the CEO says, hey, I'm busy. I need gift cards. I can't get to the store. Can you go buy the gift cards and I'll pay you back? They're for clients, and I completely forgot to buy these gift cards, but I promise I'll pay you back. So of course, a junior employee goes out, buys the cards, gives the card number to the suspect, thinking it's their boss, and they lose their money that way. Now we're seeing an example of the email that I mentioned targeting the payroll employee. So it says, I'm requesting to update my banking information with my new details due to some reasons before the next pay run. Let me know the details needed to figure it out effectively. Warm regards. So the payroll employee would reply, okay, I need your transit number, the name of the bank, and your account number. And that's where the suspect will provide a fraudulent bank account, and the employee's pay can potentially go into a fraudulent bank account. Okay, so now merchandise scams. This is an important one, especially around the holiday season. So many people are trying to save a bit of money, and fraudsters know that. So they're trying to capitalize on that. What they do is fraudsters always prey on vulnerabilities, right? So, whether you're seeing an ad for merchandise on a blowout price, or an ad on Facebook, or TikTok, Snapchat, whatever, they'll put these fraudulent ads anywhere they can. They'll be using search engine optimization for counterfeit merchandise. So they may claim to be, a company that you use frequently, or you purchase from frequently, or very well, offering the product at a very low price. So what you have to watch for is, first of all, be wary. If the price is a lot lower than the market value, you should have a red flag up. Do your research. Of course, if they're claiming to be a reputable company or popular name brand, verify that the URL is the official website for that company in question. As much as possible, always use a credit card online to make purchases, or another payment mechanism that offers fraud protection, just as a backup, where in case something happens to be fraudulent, you have that fraud protection to fall back on, and you can dispute charges with your credit card company or the money service business, or whatever the case may be. Now, vendor fraud. What is vendor fraud? Well, this means that you may have an item or an old cell phone sitting around the house, and you're trying to sell it on Marketplace, or on Kijiji, or Craigslist, or whatever website you want to list your item on. So you go onto the website, you list the item, and then you start getting these messages saying, hey, yeah, I want to buy your item. I'll send you an e-transfer right now, or I'm going to send you a PayPal payment right now. So you naturally say, okay, well, yeah, if you're going to send me the payment, then I'll ship it out, right? So what the fraudsters are doing is that they're formatting their emails to look like legitimate Interac emails or legitimate PayPal emails, saying that the payment has been sent, but it requires a tracking number in order for you to get the money. So the victim would say, okay, well, I'm going to go ship it out, put the tracking number in when I get home. So that's what the victim does, ships it out Canada Post, returns home, puts the tracking number into the email, and realizes at that point that the email they got wasn't actually from Interac or PayPal. And now they have to try to scramble to try to intercept the package they've sent out. So very, very common scam to be aware of. Just know that the email address spoofing is out there. If it claims to be Interac, they'll never ask you for a tracking number. Very direct payment from them. That is the main variation, of course. I mean, if anybody's offering to send you a check, it's probably a scam as well, especially if they're trying to send you more than what you're asking for. Now, job scams, they've been around for many years. What fraudsters are doing is they'll claim to be offering a position as a personal assistant, or whatever the case may be. Most commonly, they'll ask you to provide personal information on the contract, including your name, address, date of birth, social insurance number in some cases. I don't know if I mentioned this, but you never want to share your social insurance number with anybody except for income tax, or government agencies, but only if you're 100% sure that you're speaking with that government agency. So if you're making that outgoing phone call, but never provide that information to an incoming call, or to somebody you have not confirmed their identity. So back to job scams, what they do is they convince you that you're a payment processor or an administrative assistant, and your job is primarily to accept payments and transfer them to the company. So they make you believe that you're accepting payments from clients or whatever. And so you may have to accept e-transfers and send the payment by a different method. Now, what the victim doesn't know when they're doing this is that they're actually accepting payments from other victims of other scams. So if you're ever asked, offered a position very quickly for a lot of money, work from home position, but you have to transfer money, it's a scam. Know that you could be part of money laundering if you do this. So never accept money payments and transfer them elsewhere, because you could be breaking the law. Okay, now moving on to the next slide. Now I touched on what steps to follow if you're a victim. I'm not going to read through all the steps. Like I mentioned, if you know that you have been a victim of identity theft, that some of your personal information may have been compromised, it's so important to follow the steps that are listed here. But these steps are also listed on our website at antifraudcenter.ca. And if you click on what to do if you're a victim tab, it'll give you a detailed step guide of what to do, what steps you have to take to protect your identity. So most importantly, how to report fraud. Like I mentioned, it's so important to report, even if you think that the information you have is not important, or the Canadian Anti-Fraud Center, they don't investigate. I'm not going to report to them. There's so much more to it than that. Like I mentioned, we gather the information, we share the information like we're doing today with Canadians in order to educate and prevent victimization, right? We have the ability to alert Canadians very quickly on something new we're seeing. And on top of that, we share the information with international law enforcement agencies, including Interpol, Europol, just to name a few. Now, you can report to the Canadian Anti-Fraud Center by two ways. You can call our phone number, 1-888-495-8501, or you can report through our fraud reporting system, antifraudcenter.ca. And there's actually a little image of our website here in the bottom right corner. So you click on report fraud. Basically, it'll ask you to create a GC key, which is kind of a fancy name for a username and password. Basically, all you have to do is create a username password. Once you do that, you can log in and you'll be able to file your occurrence. So that wraps up my presentation. I think we're gonna move along to questions if anybody has any.
Hi. Okay, I'm gonna just wait until Ivana finishes her translation. Okay, she's done. So what I'm gonna do is we don't have a lot of questions, but as you were presenting, I've come up with a few questions. Okay. Yeah, just 1 second here. And I'm just gonna go as you switch slides. So the first that it kind of, that stood out was about volunteering. How can I volunteer at Canada Anti-Fraud Center?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and it's a question we get a lot. Most of our volunteers are located in North Bay, because that's where we're located, right? Of course, you have to be a senior. Right now, I believe we're looking for more like bilingual volunteers, English and French. But it's a great question. You could just reach out to us through social media, and if you're interested in volunteering, then we might consider your proposition.
Hey, thank you. And I'm gonna just take a few seconds to wait until Ivana finishes translation. Okay. So some of these types of fraud have been around for decades, I believe, like phone calls and identity fraud. all those fraud with the SIN numbers. Like, and for example, Ukrainians, newcomers, they when they arrive in Canada, and when they first experience this, they typically ask questions like why there is so much fraud in Canada, because that's something that they probably hadn't experienced in their country, in Ukraine, for example. Like in Ukraine, there is fraud, but probably not as much as in Canada, for example, through phone calls or text messages.
It's a great question, and I wish I could tell you exactly why. I think, I think generally speaking, Canadians trust a lot more, and they're not necessarily thinking, right away that what they're getting, whether it's a phone call or whatever, is a scam. Now we know that fraudsters are targeting certain demographics, right? They're going to target newcomers that aren't aware and claim that they're a government agency, because newcomers, they're maybe not be aware that the government doesn't reach out that way, right? Newcomers may not be aware that they're not supposed to share their social insurance number. Fraudsters are always staying on top of this kind of stuff, and unfortunately, they target vulnerabilities. And the best way to protect ourselves is just by remaining educated and spreading that prevention messaging.
Okay, thank you. Are there any blacklists of fraud businesses or individuals? For example, individuals involved in romance fraud or scams. Like, can people check before they make a decision to go to that or that business, or to go with some tempting job offer, for example?
So that's a great question. Again, it's not a method that the Canadian Anti-Fraud Center uses, just because of criminals' abilities to change names so quickly. So if somebody's name's not on that list, then the victim might think that it's somebody legitimate, right? We don't want to provide that false hope. So easy to create fraudulent websites, email addresses, new profiles on social media to get a new cell or phone number. So it's not a method that we use. We really want to focus on how are fraudsters getting to the victims? How are they contacting them? How are they tricking them, right? And if Canadians are aware of how they're doing it, then they know how to protect themselves from being a victim.
Okay, thank you. And let's wait until Ivana finishes translation. Okay, the next question that I have, and that's the question we typically get a lot from newcomers: is it safe to share your SIN number with landlords?
So that's a great question. You want to verify. Long story short is that some landlords are requiring a credit check, right? We recommend to check in with the landlord and tenant board in your province. If it's in Ontario, then reach out to that agency, verify that they're legitimate, that everything is okay. But yeah, you always want to check into a little further before sharing your social insurance number. That's a great question, though.
Thank you. I have the last question here. Is there a loss limit that prompts the police or Canada Anti-Fraud Center to act immediately, for example?
So loss limit, not necessarily. Unfortunately, we've seen victims lose into the millions of dollars, and in some cases, nothing can be done because it might be a cryptocurrency investment. And it, like I mentioned previously, with crypto investments, or cryptocurrency in general, it's so challenging to trace, nearly impossible. So not necessarily, because, and I want to emphasize the fact that $100 for you might be like $10,000 to someone else, right? So no. Long story short, no. With that being said, we do refer files that are over $10,000 and they get looked into. But we also appreciate the fact that every amount is different for every person.
Okay, and let's wait for Ivana. Okay, thank you very much. I don't have any more questions. Ihor, over to you.
Thanks, Jeffrey. I mean, I think that was a very insightful presentation. I know that we'll have a lot of people reviewing that on our YouTube channel, and a lot of newcomers and a lot of us Canadians have been victims. Every day I get a text message that I've won a lottery. If only I send money to some bank account or whatever, right? So it's a relentless pace that we constantly are getting bombarded with on our devices and our social media, et cetera. So thank you for that reminder. Really good information, and we appreciate your time tonight. We're going to wrap up, I think, tonight, and we will again have more to come in the series. But Jeffrey, thanks for the work that you and your team do. To Petro and Ivana, thank you for your help tonight. And on that, we will say, as we say, good night or dobranic.
Thank you for having me, and good night.
Good night.